Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Novogratz, and this is Next with Novo. Hi, everybody. This is Mike Novogratz, Next with Novo. I'm here with Derrick Morgan, famed Tennessee Titan, impact investor, good guy all around. Born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, born in Lancaster, grew up in Coatesville, and been in the South for about the last 15 years, man.
So talk about growing up in Lancaster a little bit.
Definitely not your average upbringing. I was raised by my grandparents for the first couple of years of my life with my mom, and they lived in Amish country. You know, you got horse and buggies, and one of my first babysitters was a Amish family. And so I was going to and from in a horse and buggy, very unique. Not a lot of people that look like me out there, I'll tell you that. But it was, a good experience, and had a really good foundation with my family. Moved to Coatesville, probably around my middle school years. That's when I really started getting into sports, particularly football. And one of my coaches told me I had a chance to get a scholarship and get my education paid for. And at that moment, I quit everything else. I quit basketball, baseball, track, and I was just dialed in on, getting to a scholarship for football. And so ended up getting a full ride to Georgia Tech. And the rest is history.
You go to Georgia Tech, you're a 17 or 18-year-old kid from Pennsylvania. Big time football. How was that? Was it your 4 best years of your life, or just like, God, it's just like being in the pros?
Georgia Tech was a unique experience. It is more of an academic school. So, your classmates didn't really care if you played football. Your teachers didn't really care if you played football. You had to show up. You had to apply yourself. At the time, I hated it. I was so ready to go to the league. I was just like, stay eligible, do what I got to do in the field, get to the league. But looking back in hindsight, it actually helped me out, and it actually prepared me for my next step, because, I had several jobs when I was in college, like getting pampered. We were like, full on student athletes. And so it actually helped shape me for the next phase. And so Tech I met some of my best friends when I was there, living in Atlanta for a couple of years and being able to like be a part of a special journey on that team. And so I definitely cherish those years, and felt like they adequately prepared me for my next chapter, which was the NFL.
And one team the whole time in the NFL?
Yeah, one team, 5 head coaches. So
wow,
it's kind of like it's pros and cons. Obviously staying in one location, one team the whole duration of your career is great. I was able to get married, have 2 children, so I had consistency. But the turmoil and the turnover internally was a challenge. I got my position changed several times. This coach will come in with his culture, that coach will come in with his ideology. So you're constantly adjusting, and you're constantly trying to prove yourself to the new guard. Because I knew exactly, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that this career was going to come to an end one day. And that was, quite honestly, from an injury I sustained my rookie year. I ended up tearing my ACL, and really had to sit down for a year and reflect on like my interest outside of football. I was so hyper focused on getting to the NFL that I didn't have a lot of interest outside of the game. And so from that moment, I would say that was the inception point for me, that really woke me up and like was like, hey, like if you can't play this sport, like what you gonna do? Who are you? And so I'm thankful for that. At the time, it was miserable, but I'm thankful that I had to go through that.
Now, let me ask you a question. So I had one friend, he was a wrestler, played 9 years in the NFL, 2 years of, all pro lineman. And I remember coming out and I was trying to help him with his economics. And I was shocked at how, and he wasn't wildly profligate, but he just hadn't saved that much money. You get paid, you pay the tax, you pay your agent, you take care of your family, you pay your friends, and there's not a big pile left. You seem to take a different tact. How did you approach the finances of the NFL, and how did you save so much money?
I'm a very frugal person, but let's see. I lost money because I was very passive when I first got to the league. I wasn't hands on with my money, and I was basically letting people who I didn't necessarily know, or trust, deal with my money and have me investing in things that I wasn't really aware of. I'm 21, 22 years old. I'm focused on ball, and I wasn't hands on my finances. So after I got that call from my advisor one day that, I wasn't getting that money back, that was like another wake up call to say, whoa, like that, okay, these guys don't know everything. They're making mistakes, and I'm not going to leave, my financial health and future in the hands of people that I don't really know or trust. And so I started like taking a hands-on approach to my finances. And when I first started out, I was very prideful because I didn't necessarily know all the terms of like, this is your IRR, this is your yield, or this is your, et cetera. And I would kind of like just shake my head and say, yep, okay, and I would agree. But I had so much questions, but I didn't want to look unsophisticated, or I didn't want to, come off as the dumb jock. And so I just would sit back. And then, when that moment came, when I got that call, I was like, enough. Like, I don't care if I look stupid. I don't care if I'm asking dumb questions. I'd rather look dumb now than act smart and then look dumb later. And so, that was for me like a big turning point of like involvement, hands-on, learning, asking questions, and swallowing my pride, so that I could educate myself. It really set my foundation of like, okay, once your personal finances are in order, this is going to allow you to branch off and do things that are maybe outside of the traditional stocks and bonds. Like, what are some alternative investment, strategies? What about real estate? What about venture, private equity, crypto? Like all these different things. Since my foundation was secure at this point, I was able to start learning about these different strategies and start investing my money into these things that, are going to make more than, muni bonds. And so it was more of like come in, education, preservation, and then starting to grow and starting to scale your wealth.
And so now I saw you were in medical cannabis, and you were pretty outspoken about it. Where does that come from?
I had this, this epiphany really of, not even an epiphany, it was more of a shock and another wake up call. I don't know if you remember, but around 2014, there were a lot of like a lot of stories around guys that were committing suicide, right? And like there was this whole thing of like, once somebody would retire, they would go into this depressive state, and it would be a downward cycle. And then they started talking about things like CTE, that like 90 to 95% of like former NFL players who were examined had this disease. And I'm over here sitting like, I'm 25, 26 years old at the time. And I'm like that could be me. Like that, I could be Junior Seau. Like he played 20 years. He's a Hall of Famer. He's won Super Bowls. What else what else is there?
Yeah.
But this guy was tormented internally and took his life. And so that was like, whoa, like, okay, I have 2 kids now. Like, how can I be there for my kids in full capacity beyond the game? And I started just researching like, okay, like what are alternatives? I'm not popping perks and taking, prescription drugs. I'm not doing that. They'll give them to you. Like they used to walk around the plains on the way home from games, and they'll pop, they'll give them to you readily available. And so that wasn't a solution. I came across Eugene Monroe. He was playing with the Baltimore Ravens at the time, and he was advocating for medical cannabis. And I was like, I mean, I'm not against cannabis in any way, but we're getting drug tested and all these things. Like, but let me look into it. So when I started to do my research, it started to open up a whole world of possibilities of preventative and proactive treatment for traumatic brain injury. There's actually a patent with the U.S. Health Department that has cannabidiol, CBD, as a patented neuroprotectant. And, when you're going out and you're banging heads, you need something to protect your neuro and your brain. For me, I was like, okay, let me look into this a little bit more. I started looking at like research, clinical studies out of Israel, and just a lot of potential around this drug. Started looking at how it was affecting children with epilepsy, and like talk to parents who were giving this to their children for cognitive issues. And I'm like, look, man, like at the end of the day, this is something that could really help me, but it can also help a lot of my peers, and we're not talking about this. And so I decided to take the leap and say, look, I want to be able to advocate about this. I want to tell my teammates. I want to tell everybody I know about this, because there's not a lot of downside. But I just thought it had so much potential as a treatment, especially for like traumatic brain injuries and cognitive issues. And so I'm still an advocate for it, but definitely a big believer in it.
Where did that come from internally? Like, where's that switch come from? That, how am I going to think about my community?
Well, initially, my focus was very, internal and me. 22 through 23, 24, I was very me focused. But I started to kind of wake up to the fact that A, I wasn't going to play this game forever, and B, was I using my platform to its fullest functionality and leveraging it for those who necessarily didn't have a voice. I would go back to my hometown from time to time over the years, and we would do things in the community, giving away toys, backpack, drive, like all the charitable stuff that you do as a professional athlete. You get the photo op, you sign the autograph, you go back to your reality, they go back to theirs, and then nothing really changes. And so that essentially is the blueprint and the playbook that athletes get when they get to the professional level. It's like you get your agent, you get your financial advisor, you start a foundation, you do some photo op, and nothing really changes. So for me, when the social injustice conversation started to become more mainstream, back around when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and like those instances were happening more and more on camera. It started to kind of like do something to me internally to say like these communities look a lot like the community that I come from, but like we're not doing anything to really shift the systemic issues and the systemic reasons why these communities are in the place they are. And so I started to really like question, like, was I doing enough? And the answer was no. I started really looking at things like the private prison industry. I watched a documentary called The 13th, and it was like talking about how you could unknowingly be invested in to private prisons and like Core Civic and GEO Group, and like these things were on the stock exchange. And I'm like, ooh, I'm in some ETFs and I'm in some stocks. Am I in these funds? Because they don't align with my capital. Thank God I wasn't. But that for me was a moment of like, whew, okay, I gotta wake up again, and I gotta get back in the driver's seat. And so what I started to do was educate myself on impact investing, picked up a lot of books, reached out to some people who were like in that space, and I started to educate myself. I reallocated most of my capital to things that align with my values. So started investing in affordable housing, things like investing in minority entrepreneurs, and companies like Bitwise. They do technology training for underserved populations. So things like that were tangible, and they moved the needle. And so when I would go to these neighborhoods, like the conversation would change around, oh yeah, you're gonna get to the NFL, but it was like, no, like what's your backup plan? Because chances are none of y'all are getting to the NFL. That's just the reality. So what's gonna be your backup plan? And like for me, it was like, okay, they may have a goal or a dream, but do they have the resources? Are the economics there in that community? Is the access to capital there? And a lot of the times the answer is no. And so, I started to take an intentional approach individually to try to, change some of those things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Listen, I start with this simple, just fact-based, harsh fact that we have 13% African Americans in America, and they roughly own 2% of the wealth. And until that gap starts closing, we're going to have a broken America. And right now, the first derivative is negative, i.e., it's getting worse, not better. And so we've got to at least stop it, and then it's got to start getting better. And it really won't feel like we're changing until the second derivative is positive, until it starts getting better at an accelerating rate. And so I constantly think about how do we, structurally, both at local community-based level and at a more macro level, start changing that, right? And that's where you're working on the front lines of it. It's an unbelievably challenging, because the scale is so big, right? That gap is about $11 trillion. Trillion, it's a lot of dollars. But again, it doesn't have to be closed. It just has to start closing. And I think if people could understand that, it doesn't feel as daunting. Because when you say it's 11 trillion, you just feel like I will never get that done. But it's amazing when you get a positive second derivative, when it's growing at a quicker rate, everyone feels better because you feel better when you're expanding, not when you're contracting. And so it's interesting. A lot of what you're doing, it just kind of resonated. I've been spending a lot of time in criminal justice reform, and the more time I spend listening, the more I just get pissed off and like, we got to change that system. So you end up with an opportunity zone fund. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was my stance on it when I first, heard about them. The reason why we initially launched with an intent focus on OZs were my hometown was the whole city was designated an opportunity zone, and it's the poorest city in the richest county in the state of Pennsylvania. And so you have all these resources in a mile or two in either direction, but they don't trickle into the city. And so obviously you have to incentivize that, right? You have to incentivize the capital to come into these, underserved, overlooked areas. And so the notion was, let's use this opportunity zone tool as a means to get capital into a market like Coatesville that people usually don't care about. So initially, we launched a blind pool, a $200 million blind pool fund. And at the time, in my mind, I'm like, I just retired. I'm going to be a fund manager. That's what I thought I wanted to do. I'm like 6 months into this thing, and we're putting together a project in my hometown. And, I look up and I'm like, man, we got to get a developer. And one of my consultants was like, well, aren't you essentially the developer on this deal? And I'm like, I don't know. Am I? She's like, yeah, you're bringing all these things together. You're orchestrating everything. You're coordinating all the pieces. I'm like, oh, well, this is what I want to do. I don't want to sit behind a desk and manage money. I don't want to be a fund manager per se. I do want to, bring capital into this project in these areas, but I want to be on the ground. I want to leverage who I am to be a connector, to be a bridge. And so what we did, Mike, was we pivoted from a blind pool fund structure to just really doing project by project fundraisers for specific deals. Obviously, coming out as a first time fund manager, it's not the easiest thing to do to raise money. Not that it's impossible, but you always have that knock against you. And then let's face it, there's the narrative of athletes and money, right? Those two things usually don't mix. Yeah. And so we were fighting all those things, and we're still fighting, but we're fighting in a different way, and we think a more efficient way. And so, man, I along the way, I met a lot of good people on my journey. My partner, Kendrick Whittington, he's out of Austin. We do real estate together in that market and several other markets. Actually do disaster relief efforts through FEMA in 5 states. And so we build about 100 single family homes a year. And then I also met my last partner, Brendan Doherty, when he was at Forbes. He ran a division called Forbes Impact. And so, meeting him, he brought a whole nother perspective to the table. And so the three of us launched Kingdom. And then, over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've been really playing the role of developer. We have several projects going on in Nashville, Atlanta, and Birmingham. we just closed on one here in Nashville to do a 50 unit affordable housing deal with a nonprofit. And so, we're starting off, with a very humble posture to understanding that like this is a long game.
But it's still mission aligned with how do I make an impact in these communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's the underlying theme. It's just a different means of doing it.
How is it, we've gone through this George Floyd moment last year, which really, kind of galvanized the country in lots of ways. There's a New York version of how that felt. There's a Los Angeles version of how that felt, but there's a Southern version, especially as a Black American. What was it like in Nashville or in Tennessee as a Black American in this? What was a kind of a really moment of reckoning with race in America?
Yeah, I think what it did, Mike, was it was, you couldn't no longer hide from it. There's a lot of people that didn't want to have these uncomfortable, tough conversations around race in America. And, quite frankly, a lot of white people will point to the fact that we had a Black president, that, all this is behind us. That's not the case. And so I think particularly down here in Nashville and Tennessee, it's like, there was just a lot of ignorance really from some of my white friends that didn't quite understand the magnitude of racism and oppression that still persists in this country. And so I had a lot of my white friends reach out to me and say, look, man, like, what can I do? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm like, look, you don't got to apologize. Like, you didn't do nothing wrong. But it's more so like there was this lethargic apathy of like passiveness that I picked up on since being here. I went to school in Atlanta, so coming to Nashville, it was a very different, environment when it came to race. You got a lot of successful Black people in Atlanta. To Nashville, you don't really see that. I went out to a nice restaurant last night, and I was the only, person that looked like me in there. And so it was more of a passive energy that I felt when it came to race. But what the George Floyd incident did was you could no longer hide from it, man. And so I think, the tension down here was at an all-time high. And, you had people out in the streets, you had the protests and all those things going on. But what I think it really did was it started to spark the conversation around race in uncomfortable situations that needed to happen. And so I think, obviously we have a long way to go. It does, my thing is my whole notion was like, I hope this doesn't go away in 6 months, because this problem isn't going to go away in 6 months. And so, I just want it to be, I want to see authentic, caring, like people caring about this problem in an authentic way. But yeah, it was tense, man.
I know a lot of the owners who are aligned with how you're feeling. Do you think they've learned? Do you think the NFL is on the side of change and justice, or are they still, is it still a frustration for you?
Well, I think they're trying. They're playing catch up to some extent. In my opinion, if you have a league full of Black people, you should have some self-awareness and awareness into the issues of the people that you employ. And a criticism could be, well, why did it take this, for the NFL or anybody in general to step up and start to take pledges and take action? So, that being said, I do think that are coming out of this are very positive. There's a lot of money flowing to issues that affect, social injustice. The Kaepernick thing definitely was a miss. You got people kneeling. You had people kneeling in 2020 who were one of the main criticizers of Cap back in 2016. And so I think that it became more socially appropriate to be an activist or to be, down with the cause, so to speak. So to me, it kind of comes off as phony. I'm just being honest with you. Like, you know, to my earlier point, like, are people going to still care about this in 6 months? If the mainstream media isn't talking about it, are our corporations and our, Fortune 500 companies, and are we still going to be prioritizing this thing? Because it's not going away.
Yeah.
You talk about 11 trillion, that's not going away. And you said it's getting worse. So, I think people like yourself and myself, like, people who care about these issues and are there on the ground, like, great, we benefit because there's more capital flowing for these issues. But I'm hopeful for a sustained effort because it's a big problem.
Anything you want to ask me?
Come join my podcast. We have a
I'd love to.
podcast launching on Clubhouse. It's called Icons of Impact. Essentially what it does, Mike, is it takes two perspectives of an impact investment. So, somebody like yourself who's an investor, invest in a company, you're really investing in an entrepreneur. So we're getting your perspective as the investor, and also the flip side of the story from the entrepreneur and how that investment, really correlated to that company's success. And so it's a 360 perspective of telling stories about impact investments and like how those things, change society. So
I love that. Love that. Awesome. Well, thanks a ton for your time. I'm impressed as heck. I didn't realize you were only 32. Now I'm even more impressed. And so I'm going to cheer for you from the sideline. Probably cheer harder now that you're not a Tennessee Titan, that you're actually just out there doing the good work.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time.
All right. Be well.